everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. My name is Chris Wired, and this is my good friend.
As always, I'm Jacob Nemuth.
So last time, we did movies that dealt with the choreography from the famous guy Busby Berkeley. This time, we're dealing with 4 films that were from the same director, and this guy was known for making huge spectacles of his time. Before Steven Spielberg, there was Cecil B. DeMille. Now, when it comes to this guy, he was known for making big movies. In fact, his biggest movie you probably see every Easter weekend, The Ten Commandments. So, spoiler alert, one of the films we're not doing is The Ten Commandments. But we'll be looking at 4 films that were pretty popular for their day. The first film, we're going back to ancient Egypt with his take on the story of the last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you know this story. She's the last queen of Egypt. She falls in love with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, but in the end, she ends up killing herself. And Rome takes over Egypt.
Who played everybody?
Well, let's start off with the lead actress. We had Claudette Colbert as Cleopatra.
Mm-hmm. Very, very pretty. She was.
Yeah. And this was the year this movie came out, 1934, it was a big year for her. Because this movie also earned her the Oscar for Best Actress for the winner of Best Picture that year, It Happened One Night.
Mm-hmm. And then 2 other characters that we're gonna be following as well is the actor who plays Julius Caesar and also Mark Antony. There's another couple faces to be on the lookout for as well.
Yeah, Warren Williams as Julius Caesar. He's only in the movie for over a half hour, but yeah, but he gives the feeling of being the most powerful man in Rome.
Mm-hmm. He deserved way more screen time, in my opinion. He played the role so well, and I wished he was in more of the film.
Yeah, I mean, but of course they end up killing him on the famous Ides of March.
Ides of March, not even a third of the way into the film.
And then you have Henry Wilcox as Cleopatra's second lover, Mark Antony, and you can definitely tell that he is definitely unlike Caesar.
Definitely unlike Caesar. A bit reluctant at first as a lover.
Also a bit sexist.
Very, very. That's actually a recurring issue in the film, but we'll discuss that in a little bit.
Now overall, this movie, it's not historically accurate. I mean, it is definitely way off. In fact, I would consider it more in line with the Shakespearean takes of the story of Caesar and Cleopatra.
Yeah, when watching this movie, you really don't want to look at it as more of a historic retelling of the film. It really is a dramatization and takes some liberties into its own for the sake of Hollywood.
Yeah, well, it was worth it.
It was worth it. Overall, the film itself has actually got a bit of a typical for the era production value. One of the things of note is the lead actress. She actually had appendicitis during the film, so she was stuck laying down for most of the film. Get out a timer if you ever watch it, because she's never standing up for more than 2 minutes. In fact, the longest she stands up is when she kills her own brother on screen. The Cleopatra's brother on screen. That's the longest.
That wasn't her brother. That was the prime minister.
That was the prime minister of Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay, but when she kills the prime minister and talks with Julius Caesar, that's the longest she's standing for the whole film, and that's about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But Cecil B. DeMille really liked putting a lot of money into it, and this was a pre-coded movie, but released post-code. So there's actually some censorships that you're not going to really see in the film. Like there's a couple of nude scenes at the very beginning of the film where there's a nude slave woman. That's almost in none of the releases of the film because of the code. And furthermore, in typical pre-coded fashion as well, there's really elaborate dance scenes and really elaborate costume work and design and set design to really bring you into ancient Egypt and also ancient Rome as well.
Yeah, I mean, costumes that Claudette Colbert wears, I mean, she just looks amazing in them.
Looks fantastic as Cleopatra. Very seductive role, and you wouldn't even know she had appendicitis. Again, she powered right through it and played the seductive role of Cleopatra to a T. I loved her role in this Cleopatra.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if she actually got nominated for Best Actress for this movie as well. She would have lost to herself.
That. I don't think that's going to be possible, honestly. But another thing of note as well is that there are some issues with the film that I at least have. This is less about production value and more about like modern code of ethics. There is a little bit of sexism, there is a little bit of racism, especially in the earlier parts of the film. It's more prevalent, but as the film continues, it kind of lessens and lessens as the drama story kind of unfolds and develops.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the production. I mean,
Yes.
Cecil B. DeMille wanted this to be big.
Yes, he wanted every movie to be big. That he was a spare no expense type of mentality.
Okay, John Hammond.
Well, it's true. And we'll see that you'll see me say that a lot through this episode when we talk about Cecil B. DeMille of he likes big, he likes spending gobs of money, and he likes making movie studios kind of shake in their boots and make their post-depression bank accounts weep in tears. But it was worth it. It was worth it.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to like the sets,
Oh my god.
they may not be historically accurate. I mean, in fact, they're more of a,
They're more Art Deco, but that was one of the charms of the movie. Was it was actually praised for its modern set design. It was actually praised for having this really, really burlesque style Art Deco theme throughout the entire movie. In fact, the Art Deco that was peak Art Deco architecture of the era. That was peak mid-century. That was you were talking the early days of the mid-century modern era.
I mean, look at the final scene when Cleopatra kills herself. I mean, that shot with her on, that shot of the throne and the giant
Yes.
wings in the back, that just screams Art Deco.
It does. It does. If you love the 1930s and you love Art Deco, this is basically a show. It is a showstopper. It really is.
Now, when it comes to showstoppers, the big one in this film was the one on Cleopatra's barge.
Yes, that was their big dance scene that was very prevalent with a lot of films of that era, around 33, 34. We talked about it in a previous episode when we were talking about a lot of movies from that era, where the thing was big dances and big choreographed set scenes and stuff like that. And the barge was probably the most famous of those scenes.
Yeah, especially when it comes to that long pan at the
very end, as they're covering the bed as, Antony and Cleopatra do the naughty naughty. And
you hear the big music.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the pounding of the drums with the rowers rowing.
Mm-hmm. Just absolute epic. But that was per the norm. That was the norm at the time.
Yeah. And I gotta say, even if this is not historically accurate,
No.
I really enjoy it.
I do too. It's a fun movie. There are some sore spots in it. My least favorite part of the film was actually one of the most respected parts of the film, which was the fight sequence.
Well, he's talking about the montage near the end of the movie where the Romans fight the Egyptians, and in the end they lose.
Yes, and
Well, the Egyptians lose.
the Egyptians lose, and a lot of people like that part of the scene, but I found it to be a little bit repetitive. You could definitely tell. You mentioned this earlier. That you mentioned this off camera, where some of the scenes were actually reused from a previous film 10 years prior of Cecil B. DeMille's. And I felt that a lot of the sequences in the montage were a bit too repetitive, and I felt that the montage was a little too long.
Yeah. Plus, I think the special effects could have been a little better.
Well, the special effects of that era weren't really anything to write home about. Again, as I mentioned during the production part, Cecil B. DeMille, he did like to experiment a little bit here and there. Like later in his career, he would really like to experiment with Technicolor. But this was before he experimented with Technicolor, and so he didn't really do anything groundbreaking when it comes to technology. He didn't do stereo sound, that didn't exist yet. He didn't do anything of that nature.
Yeah, well, if anything, all I can say is that when it comes to Cecil B. DeMille, he can make a movie as grand as one could be. And
Yes.
this movie's less than 2 hours long, and
It's one of his shorter films.
yeah,
It is. It's one of his shorter films.
yeah, and I mean, normally his films are like over 2 hours long.
Yes, 2.5 hours is like the average.
Heck, the Ten Commandments, that was almost 4.
Yeah. 4 hours.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, this movie was a big hit when it came out. It was the highest grossing film in 1934. It was even nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. In the end, it actually won 1 for its cinematography, and I can definitely see why.
Yeah, as can I. Overall, what would you rank this movie? Actually, what were your favorite parts of the movie? You never told me what your favorite parts of the movie were.
Well, that's a toughie. Honestly, can't say at the moment, but if anything, I really enjoyed the scenes with Caesar and Cleopatra. You could tell they had a connection.
Oh, yes. Back to that, are we? I wish there was more screen time. I love
Yeah.
that chemistry.
I mean, you could definitely tell there was some sort of connection between Antony and Cleopatra, but
Caesar and Cleopatra that you can't replace that.
well, I don't know. I mean, when it came to Rex Harrison's version of Caesar and the 1963 version of Cleopatra with Liz Taylor, that earned him an Oscar nomination.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you're playing as such a powerful emperor of the era,
Well, not emperor, more like ruler.
emperor, ruler, that's up for debate even now, what his intentions were. If you're going to be filling big shoes, you got to do it right.
Yeah, I mean, look at how Henry Wilcoxon did Antony.
Another, again, a fantastic performance. That was probably my favorite scene. My favorite scene was with Antony and not Caesar, where he, he goes ahead and stabs himself, but not before he has this monologue about how he betrayed his country and basically lost everything. And this was immediately after the montage, which is ironically my least favorite scene. Has this dramatic death, and then Cleopatra rushes in, saying, "I've got a boat ready," and then he sees that Antony is hurt, and he gets up and goes, "How deep does a man have to stab before he dies?" And I'm sorry, I broke out laughing the first time I heard that. I thought that was the funniest thing. Just his expression and his annoyance of not even his own suicide is gonna be right. is gone wrong.
And the way he says it, it sounds very Shakespearean.
It does. It was a harrowing moment in that movie for me, at least for me.
Yeah. All in all, what would you give this movie on a scale of 1 to 5 stars?
I would probably give it a solid. Not quite 4, but I don't want to say 3.5. So I'm gonna say 3 3/4, 3.7-ish.
I'm gonna give it a solid 4.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a fan of Cecil B. DeMille, this is a must-watch.
Yeah, and if you like Art Deco styling, and if you enjoy semi-historic dramatizations, it's a good movie. It's a good flick.
Yeah, and this wouldn't be the only Cecil B. DeMille film Claudia Cabrera would star in. A year before, she was in a very risque movie called The Sign of the Cross.
That's on my watch list.
Yeah. So that was our take on Cleopatra. Now we're going to do a major time shift from ancient Egypt to 19th century America, where we're going to be dealing with the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, this was a movie I know you're interested in.
Yes, the movie that we were referring to, of course, is 1939's Union Pacific, one of the greatest westerns of the era, and it deals with, as he mentions, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. Opens up with Abraham Lincoln signing a proclamation to construct a transcontinental railroad, and then the movie goes to it's a dramatization of how the East has been struggling with the woes of building their half of the railroad.
Along with that, there's also a love triangle that happens with an engineer's daughter between a troubleshooter and an old friend of hers who's a gambler.
Yes, and that kind of plays into the role of why the railroad on the Eastern Front is struggling. One of the bankers wants to get his half, the Western half, to a certain point first because there's a government, I think it was a government buyout, or there was something along the lines of it doesn't say in the movie why there's a race, per se. It does a poor job of doing that, and for the life of me, I can't remember why there was a race to begin with, but I remember there being a very substantial reward for whoever gets there first. and it was basically encouragement, the government encouraging the building of it, saying, hey, whoever gets there first gets either majority control of the line or gets like a small government cut or a tax cut or something along those lines. So
Now-
there was definitely a lot in it for both sides.
Now, when it came to the cast, they got some big names. I mean, as the lead actress, you have Barbara Stanwyck, who was very popular at that time, and I can definitely see why. I mean, she did a great job.
Did a very good job playing the role of an engineer's daughter, you know, with a very strong Irish accent.
And then you have the two guys who she falls for: the troubleshooter, played by Joel McCrea, and the gambler, played by Robert Preston, who you might recall from The Music Man.
Yes, two, again, very iconic actors of the era.
And it always keeps you guessing who she's going to go for.
Right into the very end, too, may I add.
Yeah. And plus you have some very interesting recurring characters like Akin Tamaroff as one of the troubleshooter's sidekicks. And there's also an early performance of future Oscar winner Anthony Quinn as one of the bad guys, minions.
Yeah, and another role cast is actually a whole Native American tribe as well. I think it was the Iroquois.
I don't know, but this is a Western film, and this was still during that time when it was the whole cowboys versus Indians sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was one of the... Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I didn't think you'd go to me.
Yeah. All in all, when it comes to the cast, they did a great job.
It did. Now let's talk about the production value a little bit.
Oh yes. Now when it came to this movie, it's definitely much bigger than Cleopatra.
Much bigger than Cleopatra. One of the grandest scenes, of course, was the train crash, but that's not even the only one. There is this grand scene after grand scene in classic Western fashion. But some of the key tidbits about the film to keep in mind is that Cecil B. DeMille directed the film basically bedridden. He was ill for the majority of the filming of the movie and was quite sick for quite a while. So you gotta imagine this guy who's all about the show must go on. I'm gonna make sure this is the big film, and he's doing it from the comfort of his own bed because he has no choice.
I got to give him major credit.
Honestly, because from literally doing remote work and still churning out one of the best westerns ever, in my opinion.
And 1939 was a big year for westerns.
It really was.
I mean, it was the same year as another big film, the classic Stagecoach. I mean, those two basically made westerns the movies that we know them as today.
And another fun little tidbit is and again, this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's interesting. Towards the end of the movie, of course, when they or during the ceremony of the commemoration of the hammering of the golden spike at the Transcontinental Railroad, that's the spike. I don't mean that's a prop. That is the real, genuine article. That was the exact same spike that was used at the actual ceremony in the late 1860s. They actually got it out of the museum of a university nearby and reused it basically for the film.
Yeah, and the thing is, that must be worth a lot because that's like 17 carats if I recall.
It is 17 karat gold spike. That is correct.
Yeah. Along with that, there's also the special effects. You could tell they definitely used a lot more in this movie.
There is quite a lot of special effects. One of the special effects that I appreciated was how there was some speed up scenes. Where some of the scenes were sped up a little bit. And I still don't know how they quite did that on one master strip of film. Because how speeding up usually works in film is they just play it back faster. Simple as that. They literally will just have the camera or the video player itself go a little faster. And most of the time when it comes to older movies, before voices were added to film, they would just literally, there would be a guy operating the projector. And if the scene needed to be sped up a little, he would just turn up the dial a little bit to speed it up.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how they did that because they had to do it by hand. How do they stretch out the film to run faster on the same strip?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know. All I know is that when it came to that scene with the train crashing through the snow, that was very good.
Yeah, very, very good. They did a lot of model railroading for a lot of those bigger, more epic scenes. because that isn't even the only train crash. There are two train crashes.
Yeah.
You know, there's also the scene with the Native Americans. You could, out of the two, I think the one with the Native Americans are a little bit less believable. You could definitely tell that one was a little bit more of a train set.
Yeah.
But you did what you had to do at the time. It would have been extremely expensive, even for Cecil B. DeMille, although that's debatable to some, to have an actual train crash.
Yeah. Now, when it came to the sets, he wanted them to be. He wanted them to be big. He practically built a whole town.
He did. He built a whole town that was actively moving, and you can tell it was actively moving. And the thing is, like, it's shockingly believable. It isn't like 1950s, you know, bright color Western. No, you can tell that there is quite a bit of grit in the movie. You know, there's quite a bit of grit with the costume designs and the set design, and
Even with the characters.
even with the characters.
When it comes to the characters, they're really down to earth.
Very down to earth.
It's
and,
not-
and quite diverse with their nationalities, which is something that wasn't quite common even back then. Irish people were looked down upon at this time in film, just in general. So the fact that they had such strong Irish representation came to me as a little bit of a surprise, honestly.
Yeah, and then there's the action sequences too.
Yes, very, very well done, very well choreographed,
Very well edited.
very intense too. Like, you did not know if they'd make it out, you know, especially with the Native American train scene. You did not know if they were going to make it out alive. And there was, especially when the cavalry was literally, rolling in, they definitely made it so that time was of the essence. I get goosebumps just thinking of it, you can tell. Because of the trumpet and them waving the American flag on the train going, okay, we're going to save these guys. They were hauling.
Even when a bridge is on fire.
Even when the bridge was on fire. It was amazing scenes, legendary scenes.
Yeah, the trains that they used in this movie, you can definitely tell this was definitely a train movie.
It was. That was the point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A train western.
Yeah. Along with that, there's also the cinematography. Now, when it came to Cecil B. DeMille, he used real life locations for the film.
He didn't have to travel far for it either, because Hollywood is not, this is old school Hollywood, Hollywood is technically, LA and Hollywood are not far from the desert. So they didn't really have to travel far.
Yeah, well, all in all, this movie, I definitely think this is definitely his biggest film of the 30s.
I agree. I think this is one of, if not the biggest film of the 30s. Won a lot of awards.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Apparently, it actually didn't premiere in Hollywood. It premiered in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, that's right. It did. And then it had two other premiere dates, one in LA, and then the last one was in New York. In fact, the New York premiere was in 1940.
And when it came to the one in Omaha, that gathered about 300,000 people, if I recall.
Yeah.
From a book.
Well, this was also in the era when a lot of movies. Same year, Wizard of the Oz. Same year that premiered in Oconomowoc. So it wasn't out of the norm to just pick a random town or city in America.
Yeah, if you guys didn't know, 1939 is considered the greatest year in Hollywood. There was Union Pacific, The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I could go on.
Yeah, and it was definitely on par with a movie, a big box office hit to premiere in a non-conventional location.
And yet, even if it was praised, it only got one Oscar nomination.
Criminal.
It was one of the very first films to be nominated for Best Visual Effects. Not even The Wizard of Oz won that.
What did?
A disaster romance film called The Rains Came.
Criminal.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, there was a film festival that gave it its highest award. Some of you may not know this, but in France, there's this film festival that takes place in the city of Cannes. It has been around for many decades. And originally, the first ceremony was to take place with the movies in 1939, but with World War II starting, they decided to cancel it. But in the early 2000s, a jury decided to give Union Pacific named it the first winner of its highest award, the Golden Palm. The Palme d'Or. And it was actually with other classic 1939 films like The Wizard of Oz and Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
Again, everybody knew it was a legendary film even back then. But the problem is, there was so much competition. There was a lot of competition. You can understand, especially when you're comparing it to other films like Wizard of Oz. Everyone knows
Even
Wizard of Oz.
even with the other Western, Stagecoach.
Everyone knows Stagecoach. Everyone knows Wizards of Oz. Everyone knows with Gone with the Wind. Everyone knows these movies. They all came out the same year.
Yeah. So all in all, what would you give this movie?
I would easily give this a 5-star. 5 out of 5. This was probably one of my... Ever since we started the series, this is probably my favorite movie we've done so far.
I'm giving it a solid 4.5. I mean, this is definitely a must-watch if you're a fan of Westerns.
I would agree. Even though it's not exactly the most technologically advanced film and may not hold up to modern standards, most films that we talk about won't. I would argue that it does in a way, because if you're going to watch an old Western, wouldn't you want it to be in black and white? Wouldn't you want it to be just a little grainy, just to have that little bit of old-timey charm to it?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind watching this movie again anytime soon.
I wouldn't either.
So that was Union Pacific. Now we're doing another major time shift from 19th century America to ancient Israel, where we're going to be dealing with what was one of Cecil B. DeMille's... Now, when it came to Cecil B. DeMille, along with making spectacles, he was known for making movies that were biblical epics. The Ten Commandments was one. In the 1920s, he did one about Jesus called The King of Kings. That was a huge hit. And now this film was one of his biggest. In fact, it was the biggest film of 1950. That film is Samson and Delilah. The strongest man on earth, Samson, finds himself falling in love with a woman named Delilah, who has decided to trick him into finding out his weakness, since she's wants revenge on him for killing his sister. And the thing is, he's an enemy to the people that she's looking up to, the Philistines. Unfortunately, it ends tragically.
Yeah, it's classic definition of an ancient Greek tragedy where everyone basically dies in the end.
Yeah. Now, if you were familiar with the Bible, this story was from the book of Judges. And Samson was the last known judge before the prophet Samuel showed up. Now, the guys that play Samson, Victor Mature, well...
He's a brute. But that's the role he had to play, he had to play a brute, an all bronze man. And he did so very well, definitely doing a very good job demonstrating his strength.
But the thing is, he's also a bit naive around the women.
Yes, very much so. I would say even reckless, borderline reckless with his decision-making skills.
I mean, the first woman he falls in love with, he wants her right away.
Yes.
And now, and this woman was played by the legendary Angela Lansbury, God rest her.
Very pretty in that movie.
And the thing is, she was only in her 20s when she did that movie.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, it was done, of course, when Samson goes after her, it was much to the dismay of literally everyone disapproved of this move from Samson.
Yeah.
Because it was politically a bad move and just downright reckless.
And then you have the woman who plays Delilah, Hedy Lamarr, and she nails it.
I think so as well. Definitely the queen of the silver tongue, I would say.
Yeah. Now, if any of you aren't familiar, Hedy Lamarr was a big star of her time. And also, she was actually very influential in a technological thing that we use today. Apparently, she was also worked with a group of scientists to create radio waves that nowadays is used for modern Wi-Fi.
Yeah, worked with the RAF, and I believe worked with the RAF during World War II.
Yeah, so you can thank Hedy Lamarr for helping us get Wi-Fi on our phones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you have the guy who plays the ruler of Gaza, George Sanders, who plays a very sophisticated man, but you can tell that he has an iron fist.
Oh, yes. very much so. Definitely disapproving of Samson. Definitely just wants him to go away, and is even willing to make his, his most loyal servants of, most loyal lords, or the equivalent thereof of lords, pay whatever it takes to make him go away, willing to get the edge over Samson.
Yeah. Now here's the thing too. Henry Wilcoxon, the guy who played Antony and Cleopatra, actually comes back to this movie to play a soldier of the George Sanders.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah, he was the guy who wanted Samson's first wife.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Again, kind of playing into the idea of kind of a reckless scenario.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to George Sanders, 1950 was a big year for him. I mean, with Samson and Delilah, but he also won Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars for his role in the Best Picture that year, All About Eve.
Oh, okay.
And if his voice sounds familiar, he played a certain tiger in a classic Disney movie. I'm talking about Shere Khan in the original Disney version of The Jungle Book.
Mm-hmm. And going into the production value a little bit of the movie, the idea of Samson Delilah had actually already been approved in 1939. Same 39, to be done in Technicolor. Cecil B. DeMille wanted this to be his, wanted to experiment with Technicolor in the late 30s with this piece. And the script had already been written. Everything mostly had been green lit by the by the studio, but it eventually fell apart, and they did Union Pacific instead. So the movie was put on the back burner until it was announced again in the late 40s, shortly after World War II.
Yeah. Now, if any of you didn't notice, all the movies that Cecil B. DeMille filmed, they were all released by Paramount Pictures.
Yeah, Paramount was a little scared of what Cecil B. DeMille did to their checkbook because, and I said this once before when talking about Cleopatra, I didn't really mention in Union Pacific, but it's worth mentioning for all Cecil B. DeMille movies. He liked to be expensive. He wanted bigger, biggest.
And this movie was to be his, and Samson and Delilah was to be his biggest one yet.
And most expensive. It was just the end scene alone, just the final scene alone, took months to film.
Yeah.
Months to film 30 seconds, a minute.
Yeah.
For the entire movie.
Yeah.
And it was a 6-digit figure price tag to build the set because it's in this grand stadium of sorts with this giant statue and a couple of the pillars. It's the pillar scene. And they redid that shoot 3 times at 3 different angles. And each time they did the scene, they had to completely rebuild the whole structure, which took months.
Yeah, well, I'm sure part of it was also miniature special effects.
No. That's why it took so long.
Yeah.
It was true to life. It was true to life. Cecil B. DeMille wanted an authentic, crumbling structure. So he built one. A giant structure. And he made it crumble 3 times.
But I highly doubt those pillars were made of stone because that's what have actually killed people.
No, it wasn't made of stone, obviously. I mean, it wasn't an actual, real structure, but it was true to scale.
Yeah.
It was 1-to-1.
Now, here's the thing when it comes to this version of the story of Samson. Delilah's made a sympathetic character.
Mm-hmm. And I still didn't like her.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Actually, just in general, didn't like either of the characters, but that's more for the opinion portion.
Yeah, well, along with that, the costumes themselves, partially courtesy of the legendary costume designer Edith Head.
Yes.
I mean, when it came to Heather Lamar's costume at the end of the movie, the peacock dress, that's just...
It's a fantastic set design, and if Edith Head sounds a little familiar, yeah, Edna Mode from The Incredibles would basically be paying homage to that same person, to Edith. Edna Mode was paying homage to Edith because she was one of the greats when it comes to costume set design throughout cinema history, period.
And even in haute couture as well, especially during the 50s.
Oh yeah, that was, and it really shows. Obviously isn't that true to form. I mean, it is biblical times. So a lot of robes, a lot of very colorful robes. and
Yeah.
very elaborate and colorful robes throughout the whole film. And even the silks were monotone in color, but you could tell that they're very elegant.
And they definitely helped make Hedy Lamar's character look that more seductive.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Even with the hairstyling too with her.
hmm A bit more conservative than one would like to think, but again, this is the 50s. A lot of the set design was a bit more conservative, but that's par for the course. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the movie was put in the back burner, was because Paramount was scared that the public would see the movie as a Sunday school story. But Cecil B. DeMille wanted to prove that wrong with the set design and the writing and just everything.
I mean, if you could do a movie about Jesus called The King of Kings and that was a big hit, then this movie could be.
And it was.
It ended up being the highest grossing film of 1950. And it even received 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Music Score, Best Cinematography. In the end, it won 2 for the sets and the costumes.
And wasn't the cinema score actually done by a very famous artist in their own right as well?
Victor Young. He did a lot of film scores during that time.
All right, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and when it came to these music, you can definitely tell it has that grand scale feel to it.
However, one thing I will say is, despite how grand and popular this movie was, I actually didn't care for the character of Samson or Delilah. I actually didn't. Because I felt that Samson was a bit of a brute. And I felt that both characters were quite reckless in their decision-making skills. They weren't really exactly relatable or characters I can generally resonate and sympathize for, despite the fact that the original that they actually played it up a little bit so that the characters would be more favorable. To me, at least, I don't think the movie has aged quite that well.
Yeah. So, all in all, what would you give this movie?
I mean, as I say, I'm going to be giving it a 2.5 star. I don't think the movie has aged quite that well. It is certainly an epic showpiece, especially at the end's grand finale, but the characters aren't really that likable in my eyes.
I'm giving it 3.5. Because,
What would you say is your favorite part of the movie?
I really like the final scene.
Yes, that is my favorite scene too.
Yeah. I there weren't any scenes that I really hated, but...
No, there's
Yeah.
nothing, no scene was particularly bad. It's just that I felt that the characters weren't
Yeah.
that good. The acting in act was fantastic, but
Yeah, I mean, heck, even one of the younger cast members of the movie, there was this guy, a boy named Saul, that was played by Russ Tamblyn.
mhm.
He would eventually become Riff in the original movie of West Side Story.
Yeah. Overall, I think that the movie itself, if you like grand biblical pieces, I think, and you didn't want to watch the Ten Commandments, this is the movie.
Yeah.
I think that this is a much more digestible film than Ten Commandments, and you get a much similar vibe to it.
I would also like to recommend his movie, The King of Kings, from 1927.
Yeah.
It may be silent, but you can tell that he definitely wanted to make an awesome movie about Jesus.
Yeah.
And the Passion.
Yeah, but overall, if you're not really into biblical stories, I wouldn't recommend it. But otherwise, it's a decent movie. It's not bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was Samson and Delilah. Now for our final film, we're doing one more major time shift. We're going to the modern 50s, where we're going to be dealing with The Big Top. Now this is a film that has become infamous. It is considered one of the worst winners of the Academy Award for Best Picture. That film, The Greatest Show on Earth. During the time of the Ringling Barnum and Bailey circus, a trapeze artist finds herself torn between two men. The man in charge of running the circus and another trapeze artist who really is into her. Along with that, there's other characters too, like there's a mysterious clown who people have no idea about. Like, why does he doesn't take the makeup off?
Yes, buttons.
Now this movie, this was Cecil B. DeMille's film before. This was his film before the Ten Commandments, and this one was he wanted it to be, and this was big,
Real big.
circus tent size big
You can say it was the greatest show on earth.
back then.
Well, even now. I mean, granted, the circus nowadays has kind of become a little bit fallen out of favor, but the the Ringling Brothers actually are making a comeback actually later this month, which is kind of full circle. But
Except they won't be doing animals, if I recall.
no, but that's part of the whole. The whole summary of the film really is that it is following the trepidations of being a part of the circus, and you could definitely tell that.
Especially when it was during at the peak of its popularity.
This was the peak. This is when the Ringling Brothers were the biggest of the big. And one thing of note is that this was equally as big a film for the Ringling Brothers as it was for Cecil B. DeMille and Paramount.
Because this was practically a free advertisement for them.
Yeah, and they were in on it. Like, production value?
And even with some of their members of the circus.
They actually were all hands on deck for this movie. They really were. They actually did bring the show to the big screen. Like, they literally did. They packed up the train from Baraboo in Delavan, packed it all up in railroad cars, and brought it to Hollywood for everyone to see.
Yeah. With that said, let's talk about the cast.
Mm-hmm.
You have the main actress played by Betty Hutton. She's the trapeze artist who's basically, you don't know who she's going to end up falling in love with.
Or if she's going to end up falling.
Yeah. I mean, and then you have Cornell Wilde as the other trapeze artist. Basically the diva.
Yes, very much the diva. And also a little reckless in nature as well.
Yeah.
Coming into the scene of the movie, his grand entrance is driving a foreign sports car, a Jaguar, I believe it was, with a entourage of police officers that had ticket after ticket after ticket for them, and he had no money and had basically swindled, the foreman of the circus into paying his tickets.
And then you have Charlton Heston as the guy in charge of the circus. He wants everything spick and span. He wants no crap from anyone.
Wants no drama. Wants to make sure that the show will go on without any hitches. He is the foreman of the show.
And then you have the side characters. For instance, there's Gloria Graham as the elephant woman who ends up being lusted by the tamer. But
Yes.
she doesn't want anything to do with him.
No, and all she wants to do is perform and do tricks with the elephants, and her life ends up getting put into danger because of this, this reckless animal handler that wants her.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, if I can't have you, no one else can.
Yeah, was making some really. I mean, obviously they were empty threats, but they felt real enough, and quite frankly, the foreman didn't want him gone. He didn't want to take chances, and I don't blame him.
And then you have Jimmy Stewart as the clown Buttons.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jimmy Stewart was a big star of that time, and seeing him as a clown, I did not expect that.
Well, and the thing is, he was the straight man of the whole movie too. He was often the voice of reason. He was often the voice of confidants.
Yeah,
he
you
was
could
the
tell.
confidant of a lot of different people in the movie.
Yeah, you could tell that there was a sort of like a big burden on his shoulder.
A very big burden, and it was later revealed later in the movie that
No.
Oh, okay. I guess I won't. I guess we'll leave that one up for you. Go watch the movie.
Yeah. Along with that, like I said, they had many cast members of the circus at that time. Like there was this one popular clown named Emmett Kelly. He was the hobo clown. He always had the sad face, and some of the parts with him was actually kind of funny.
Oh, the trampoline scene. And the trampoline scene was a bit of a hoot. Because I think he was just trying to eat like an ear corn or something, wasn't he?
I think it was a sandwich.
He was trying. You know what?
Even even in the final scene when he's during the parade, he's trying to play solitaire, and next thing you know, the wind blows his cars when he's like,
yeah.
yeah. And he was a big star of the circus at that time, up until
Oh,
the
yeah.
70s.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, a lot of the the shows that a lot of the showstoppers that you'll see in the circus in this movie were all part of the circus for the most part. There is very little, there are very few actors from Hollywood in this movie. A lot of the stuff you'll see was actually from the circus.
I did not expect to see guys dressed up as Disney characters in a Paramount movie.
Disney was a lot less strict about copyright back then.
I mean, you even see characters from Alice in Wonderland, and that was only released a year before this movie came out.
It's called being topical. It's called being topical. That's how you become the greatest show on earth.
Heck, you even have Dorothy Lamour singing a song, and out of nowhere, you see this cameo of her co-stars from the Road 2 movies, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby.
Yes, yes. Now, let's talk about the production value. I mean, we've been talking about the production value the whole time, but let's talk about the fate of the circus that kind of was unfortunate and why the movie itself was infamous in being not being the winner that it was.
I mean, it's not bad. It's definitely not.
No, it's a good movie.
I mean, while people consider it the worst winner, there are many reasons. First off, it's sort of due to political stuff at the time.
Even now.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, even now, it's extremely, you see the animal treatment in the movie. Like, they did have to be a little bit rough with the animals in order to get them to do certain things. So there is actually, like, a sense of moral, the lines of morality were definitely crossed with this movie. And it's one of the reasons, well, I would say it's one of the Ringling Brothers circus itself was one of the reasons why you don't see elephants and tigers and anything of that nature in the circus anymore. Nowadays, it's more trapeze artists and contortionists and stuff of that nature.
yeah. Along with that, it was also due to the political nature of America at that time.
Mm-hmm.
This was the era of the Red Scare. I mean,
Also a Wisconsin thing. So this is about a Wisconsin thing about a Wisconsin thing.
yeah, I mean, Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin, next thing you know, he's accusing everyone of being communists. People in Hollywood are being blacklisted. But yet,
I bet you he started hating on the circus because he went to one of the local shows here in Wisconsin and got scammed. I don't know. That's called a conspiracy, and don't take anything I just said as a word.
well, here's the thing. Sesame DeMille was known for being a conservative Republican at that time.
Yes. This is where we get to the.
Here's the main reason why they gave him the Oscar for Best Picture. I mean, 1952 was a big year for movies. There was the classic Western High Noon, the iconic musical Singin' in the Rain, and yet neither of them won Best Picture. The reason they wanted to give it to Sesame DeMille, it was sort of like a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Not just that, but it was a safe bet. Cecil B. DeMille everyone knew what he was about. Everyone knew what he was about. Everyone knew that there's no way this guy's a communist. No way. Like, even if somebody were to accuse, we'd probably just write it off. Like, nobody was going to accuse the man of being, he was not. He was a safe bet to make. Because the last thing that Hollywood wanted at the time was to give the movie give the biggest award, film award of the year to someone that was gonna shortly then get accused of being a communist. It's one of the reasons why we don't really see like anybody like Charlie Chaplin showing up.
Yeah. Along with that, I mean, like I said, this was sort of like a lifetime achievement for his expansive career. He started doing movies all the way back when Hollywood was brand new in the mid-1910s.
Yes.
A career that spanned over 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they decide, let's give him the Oscar because he deserves it.
Yes.
Nowadays, he wouldn't. In fact, I think he should have won for the Ten Commandments.
Yes.
He should have won Best Picture for that.
Yes. I would say this is one of his worst films he's ever done.
But, like I said, it's not terrible.
No. Like, if you are a fan of the circus and you want to just kind of look at it as a retrospective, it's a good movie.
I mean, it's up there with, for circuit films like Disney's Dumbo.
Yeah, and it's also got, again, some really iconic scenes that to this day are still being referenced.
And look at the train crash scene.
Yeah.
That was the scene that influenced Steven Spielberg to become the filmmaker we know him as today.
Yeah. And so, However, there are some other scenes that are a bit sore on the eyes, like at the very ending with the
parade.
with the parade. I actually didn't like the parade scene, mainly because I didn't like the lead actress's singing. I didn't care for her singing. That's the only reason I don't like the ending of the movie, is because I didn't care for the lead actress's singing voice. I felt that her timbre was a little bit too much. It felt a little shrilly to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, nobody's perfect.
No.
But still, I think this film also made Charlton Heston a big star. I mean, think about it. After this, he would do Moses in the Ten Commandments, and then he would get an Oscar for playing Ben-Hur.
Overall, what are your favorite and least favorite parts of the movie then?
That's actually a toughie. I mean, I really enjoyed this movie. I mean, at first I thought I wasn't going to like it, but I ended up really enjoying it. I mean, this is sort of like opening a time capsule to that era of the 50s when the circus was at its peak.
Yeah, I actually didn't see the movie recently, but I watched it a lot when I was a kid during reruns because it was always on PBS. It was always on PBS or some other movie channel growing up because it's a movie about the circus, and the circus is really ingrained into Wisconsin culture.
I mean, look at how popular Circus World Museum still is in Baraboo.
Or the Clown Museum over in Delavan.
Yeah. And like you said, they're bringing it back.
They are bringing it back. They're bringing it back this month. Hopefully this episode beats the first season, because I would definitely go, if they are stopping your town, I'd definitely see what they're about. They say they're going to be doing something different. There's going to be some modern elements to it, maybe some augmented reality stuff. I don't know what the future of the circus is going to be. Only the Ringling Brothers really knows, so it's just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, anyway, and like I said, even though this was considered the worst winner for Best Picture, it still won, but it ended up also being the biggest film in 1952.
Yep.
In fact, this even won the Golden Globe for Best Picture as well, and Cecil B. DeMille even earned the Golden Globe for Best Director.
Yeah, because even though Cecil B. DeMille made it big, but he didn't do. He just kept it by the book. He kept it very traditional with this one.
Yeah, and the movie actually won another Oscar for a category that hasn't been around since the late 50s. That is for Best Original Story. Now, you see, when it comes to movies that are original, they originally did this idea of there were the people that would write a story saying what the situation was and how it was going to work out, and then you would have people adapting it into a screenplay. But then by the mid-50s, they decided to cut out the category to make way for Best Original Screenplay.
I personally think that may have been for the best.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'd feel redundant.
I mean, there have been some winners that won both Best Story and Best Screenplay, like the classic Christmas movie Miracle on 34th Street.
Yeah. Overall, what would you rank this movie?
I'm giving it a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I really enjoyed this movie. I mean, it may be called the worst winner for Best Picture, but trust me, I've seen worse movies.
And I'm going to be a little less generous and give it a 3-star, mainly because of the ending. There are, a lot of the movies actually quite good, but the ending with the singing kind of ended it for me. And honestly, it's still a good movie. If you like the circus, watch this and then watch Dumbo. That's all I'm saying. If you want to do a double feature, this and Dumbo would be a killer combination.
Yeah, especially if you're into the circus.
Especially if you're in the circus.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there have been other movies that have been considered bad winners for Best Picture, like Shakespeare in Love beating Saving Private Ryan, Crash beating Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, and it really goes to show, even in his later years, Cecil B. DeMille was one of the greats when it comes to film acting. When it comes to filmography and being a director, he was one of the greats.
Heck, even in performing, he actually narrated some of his movies, like this one.
Yes.
And you can tell in his narration that he wanted to really embrace the circus.
Yeah, he wanted to embrace the circus and how American it was.
Yeah. So that was our take of Cecil B. DeMille. Unfortunately, after the Ten Commandments, a few years later, he died, but he's still considered one of the greatest directors in Hollywood history, as well as one of the most influential. Like I said, if it wasn't for The Greatest Show on Earth, we wouldn't have Steven Spielberg.
No E.T. Think about that. No E.T. You wouldn't have. You wouldn't go home.
I thought you hated that movie.
I like it about as much, in my opinion. Oh, we'll talk about it later.
All right. Well, anyway, that was our take of Cecil D. DeMille. Next episode, we're going to the 1970s, where we'll be dealing with 4 movies that were from possibly the biggest popular genre of that decade, next to the science fiction with Star Wars. I'm talking about the disaster film. We'll be dealing with sinking ships, buildings on fire, airplanes in trouble.
And then shortly followed after that, it's going to be Halloween season. And he's given me creative role. We're going to be doing a robot movie. We're going to be doing robot films, great robot films of history.
But not Star Wars.
Not Star Wars. And not batteries not included either.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I love R2-D2 and C-3PO, there are other iconic robots in pop culture.
We'll tell you about them on a future episode.
Until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Jacob Nemuth.
And thank you very much for watching Chris's Classic Cinema. See you next time.